Welcome to the Labyrinth. I'm your host, Pratham Padav. My guest today is Dr. Mark Goulston. He's a psychiatrist, a mental health coach, and a best selling author. A few months ago, I was reading this book called Get Out of Your Own Way by Dr. Mark Goulston and Philip Goldberg. It's a very insightful book, and it has had a positive impact on my life. So I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed this conversation. Dr. Goulston, welcome to the Labyrinth.
Well, thank you. Is it Pratham?
Yes, it's Pratham, yes.
Yes. Well, I'm pleased to be joining you.
So I want to start by asking, what made you smile today?
Oh, there you go again. But you have to. Well, did you watch the TEDx?
Yes, I did.
I smile every day. You know, I'm at a stage of my life where what's most important to me is relationships. And I've been reaching out to people who have touched me, touched my heart in the last 10 years, and seeing what they're up to, trying to help them land in their future. And that's the most important thing to me. And so that made me smile today because I reached out to 2 or 3 people that I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years. And, you know, the great thing about great friendships is that you can stop speaking to them because people are busy. And when you get back together, you just pick up where you left off. There's no guilt. There's no accusation. Why didn't you call? You know, you're a terrible friend. So I think with good friends, you know, you respect that everyone is busy, and you just pick up where you left off with goodwill. And everybody I reached out to, it was exactly that way.
Is it natural to lose friends as you get older?
Well, as you get older, some of your friends die, but actually, I'll share a little story there. I've been very blessed to have 8 mentors. They've all died, so that's not such a blessing. And the last one was a fellow named Larry King. He was on CNN. He was known around the world. And I had breakfast with him every day for a couple of years before COVID. I was part of a breakfast group. And then before him, I had a mentor named Warren Bennis, who may not be known to you, but in America, you know, he is one of the leading thought leaders about leadership of the last 50 years. And one of the things that Warren shared with me in the year before he died, he said that he was trying to be a good sport, but what was happening is that he is a guru in the field of leadership. If you look up Warren Bennis, you'll just see all the books that he's written. And he was an advisor to presidents and heads of companies. But one of the things he said is that when you get into your 80s, at least in America, not in India, not in China, there's very little respect for people as they get older in America. In fact, it looks like they're just in the way. And it's painful to be irrelevant, meaning you don't seem to matter anymore. And I think that's sadly truer in America than probably any other country, because in other countries, there's still a respect, a reverence for one's elders and grandparents. But in America, it's not the case. And so one of the things that I learned from him, because he was saying how painful it was to not matter anymore. And so one of the ways that I try to keep mattering is I must mentor 50 people. That's a lot. But some of them, it's every week. And some of them, it's once every 5 or 6 years. And they consider me a mentor because we had a conversation once and I said something that they held on to and helped their life. But so what keeps me smiling is that the people that I mentor or who consider me a mentor, there's a mutual love and affection for me for them and they for me. And so that has been keeping me smiling. And so I just check in with them, see where they are in their life, and then do my best to help them. In fact, I'm not sure if you saw, I remind me because I haven't watched my TEDx for a few years, but in What Made You Smile Today, did I share that there was someone in India named Arul?
Yes, there was a guy who you spoke to in the Indian call centers.
Right. Well, there was someone, yeah, but what I shared with someone, I spoke with someone, and I asked him, what made you smile today? And he said, nobody as important as you has ever typed my name. So I'm not sure if that was in the TEDx, but it's in my life. And what happened is I changed that person's life with doing nothing. I mean, and he said every day he would wake up and he would go to his computer and he would touch the screen where I typed his name, because to him, I'm important, and he was invisible. So it's amazing how little we can do to help other people.
Yeah, it's fascinating. All you have to do is address someone else by their name and they feel important all of a sudden.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you another question. Am I my own worst enemy? Because a lot of people wake up and they feel demotivated. Nobody is holding them physically, but they don't feel like getting things done. They feel depressed, they feel demotivated. And a lot of the time, they feel like they are their own worst enemy. And they have cultivated a self-defeating behavior. How can we overcome this?
Yes, and you're referring to a book that I think came out in the last couple of years in India. You showed it to me, and
Yes, it's this one, Get Out of Your Own Way.
right. And in fact, there is an audio course that you can listen to for free if you go to himalaya.com/defeat. There is an audio course by me. I think there's 13 segments where I talk about various chapters from that book. I think we can be our own worst enemy. I'll share something with you that there's a lot of people who believe in these positive statements, positive affirmations. Look in the mirror and say to yourself, you can do better. You know, you're a smart person. You're the best. That has never worked for me. And I'm kind of envious of people that it works for, because it's pretty simple. But what works for me is I can call upon any of my dead mentors, any of the 8 people, and I can imagine them saying those things to me. So for instance, if I do a podcast and it's not one of my better podcasts, and I tell stories and I get lost in the story, or I list, here are the 5 things you need to remember, and I only remember 3 of them on the podcast. Sometimes I'll call up one of my dead mentors. And recently, Larry King is the one who died most recently. I'll call him up and I'll say, Larry, I did it again. And he has a thick, gruff accent from New York. He said, Mark, you woke me for this? Mark, I'm hardly cold yet. I just died. What is this about? And I'll say, Larry, I did it again. I got on a podcast. I started a story. I got lost in the story. I mentioned these 5 things and I could only remember 3 of them. And he says, Mark, what do the hosts think? Oh, the host liked me and said I could come back anytime. He said, Mark, would you stop it already? Would you stop it? I think you're okay. Give it a break and let me go back to being dead. And what happens is I just feel the love for him, and I feel myself missing him. But I can let those people who cared about me and believed in me, I can let them talk me out of a bad mood. I'll tell you something else, another way to motivate yourself. I was fortunate to have some pretty respected and well-known mentors. Larry King's pretty well known. And what I realized is the last thing I would ever want to do with a mentor is disappoint them. So I would never tell my mentors I was going to do something unless I was 100% certain that I was going to do it, because I didn't want to disappoint them. I didn't want them to look at me like I was somehow sloppy or had so many self-defeating behaviors. So here's something you can use in your lives. And it doesn't have to be an important person. It can be someone in your family that you love. So now, who's in your family?
My mom, my dad, my sister.
Okay, so do you want your mom and your dad to live a long life?
Sure, yeah.
Are there any health habits that your mom or dad could improve on?
Not really. I mean, I guess they could exercise a bit more, but not really. I feel like I could do a lot more, honestly.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is if you're listening in, if you can think of someone that you love, and if you can think that there is something that they don't want to do, but would be good for them.
Yeah.
It would help them to be happier. It would help them to be more successful. It would help them to be less stressed. So if you can think of what that might be, one of the things that can motivate you is to reach out to that person. And you can do this at work, by the way, with a friend, with a peer, and you reach out to them and you say, I'd like your help with something. And they're going to say, what? You can say, there are a couple things that I would like to improve, and I have trouble motivating myself. But if I knew you were doing some things to improve yourself, and you can pick whatever they are, I think when I'm having trouble doing something, imagining you doing something that would make your life better would motivate me. So I have 3 grown children, 40, 34, 32. And I have 3 grandchildren, 3 age 3 and under. And I adore my family. And my family would like me to take better care of myself. So I don't eat as healthy as I should. I don't exercise as much as I should. But something that would motivate me to do each of those is to reach out to my children and ask them, what is something that you don't do that would make your life better, but you don't do it? And then they could come up with it. And I think if I could imagine my children, my grown children, doing something that they don't want to do, but would make their life better, I think it could help me resist a little bit of the sugar that I eat, because I like sweet things. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess behavior is very contagious. When you see other people improving themselves, you automatically improve yourself as well. So does that mean that a person's environment is extremely important?
I think whatever works, works. I'm a psychiatrist, and our view of the world is that there's biological, psychological, and social factors that determine our behavior. I'll share something with you that's pretty new. I've been doing interviews on mental health. What is mental health? And I've come up with a very simple definition of mental health, and tell me if you agree with it, because I think things are too complicated sometimes.
Yeah.
And to me, mental health is uh, is being able to modify your reaction when something upsetting happens to you, so that when you respond to the world, you're more constructive than destructive. So when someone yells at us or criticizes us, we have a reaction. We don't like that. But if you could modify what goes on inside, so that your response to the world is positive instead of negative, to me, that's mental health. And the problem with people who have mental health issues is they're not able to do that. Someone yells at them, someone talks down to them, someone cuts them off in traffic. Although I have to tell you, when I was in Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore, and when I was in Delhi going to the Taj Mahal, I think I counted at least 40 times when I should have been killed in the traffic. So I guess cutting off is just part of traffic, and then you stop at a light and someone shares their cobra with you or their monkey. But I loved India. I would love to come back.
I really like your definition of mental health because it's very constructive and useful. Because, like you said, mental health is about our reaction to a negative issue. Because a lot of the time, we cannot control what is happening outside, but we can control our reaction to it. That I think is very productive.
So for instance, I'll give you an example. Someone gave me this insight and it's helped me. They said, and the insight was, be kind to whoever you meet, because you never know what's going on in their life.
Yeah.
So if someone cuts you off in traffic or someone yells at you, it may be because someone yelled at them. But I love that advice. Be kind to people because you never know what's going on in their life.
As a psychiatrist, you developed many models of human behavior, one of which is surgical empathy. What exactly is surgical empathy?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. When I trained in psychiatry, one of my early mentors was one of the pioneers in suicide prevention. And so when I finished my training, I didn't go and work in a clinic. I was actually going to get a fellowship, but it got canceled. So I decided to just go out on my own. And this mentor of mine used to refer me very suicidal patients who had to be discharged from the hospital. So he was in the hospital, he would go do a consultation, and some of these patients, they weren't immediately suicidal, but it was still in their mind. And the trainees didn't want to see them as outpatients because they were worried they'd go kill themselves. And so he would go up, do a consultation, and then he'd refer them to me. And I think I was really fortunate, because if I went and worked in a clinic or some sort of institutional setting, when I would see people, I would be very busy making sure that I checked all the boxes. Have you been depressed? Have you been anxious? How long have you been depressed? What are some of your physical symptoms? What are some of your mental symptoms? But, but because I didn't work in a institution or a clinic, I was able to be more innovative, and I learned to listen into people's eyes. And so when I was seated with people who still felt suicidal, and I looked into their eyes were screaming at me, even though they were like this, but their eyes were screaming at me, "You're checking boxes and I'm running out of time." Wow. So I had a choice to check boxes, which is what I would have had to do if I was in a clinic, or go where their eyes took me. So I stopped checking boxes and I let their eyes take me into the dark night of the soul, which is where they were stuck. And so one of the things I learned about people who are feeling highly suicidal, and you wouldn't understand this unless you have felt suicidal, but death is very compassionate to psychological pain that won't go away. When you feel hopeless, worthless, and that life is useless, death can take away that pain. It's like the sirens calling the sailors in mythology onto the rocks. And so what happens is when people feel pain like that won't go away, they grab on to thinking, if worse comes to worse, I can always kill myself. And what will happen is they will secretly keep that as something they can do. They won't talk about it because they don't want to scare their families, or they don't want people to throw them in the hospital every time they think about it. But they'll keep it as a way to get rid of the pain. But unfortunately, as my mentor, Dr. Ed Schneidman, the suicide expert, used to say, he said, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And so what I learned is that suicide felt their pain, and I developed this ability to go in and feel their feelings with them. So surgical empathy is going in, and when people feel that you feel their feelings, they might let go of being suicidal and grab on to your empathy. So I'll give you one very special story that really proved this to me. There was a woman I was seeing that Dr. Schneidman had referred to me. I'll call her Nancy. That's not her name. And she had made several suicide attempts in the years before I saw her. She'd been in the hospital a month, 2 months at a time before I saw her, because way back then people could be in the hospital for a long time. I mean, it's different now. And I didn't think I was helping her. And I was seeing her for about 6 months, and she never made eye contact. So if you're me, this is Nancy. So, and I didn't think I was helping her. And in those days, once a month, I would work in a psychiatric hospital covering for the other doctors. And sometimes you don't sleep for 24 hours. And when you don't sleep for 24 hours, things happen to your body and your mind, because you're sleep deprived. And so I hadn't slept for 24 hours. And on a Monday, I come into my office and there's Nancy. And she has the same look as she always does, where I'm looking at her and she's looking away. And as I was looking at her, all the color in the room turned to black and white. So I'm looking at her and the room is black and white. And then I felt very cold, and I thought I was having a stroke or a seizure. And I'm a medical doctor, so I'm a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. So I did an exam on myself to see if I was having a stroke or a seizure. I put my finger out to see if I was seeing double. I tapped my knees, I tapped my elbows to see if I was having a stroke or a seizure, and everything was fine. And I realized I wasn't having a stroke or a seizure. And then I had this crazy idea that I was feeling what she felt.
Oh, okay.
And so seeing the world as black and white and cold is what I had this crazy idea that this is what she felt. And because I was sleep deprived, I said this to her, Pratham. I said, Nancy, I didn't know it was so bad, and I can't help you kill yourself.
Okay.
But if you do, I will still think well of you. I'll miss you. And maybe I'll understand why you had to get out of the pain. And I thought to myself, I'm in real trouble. I just gave her permission to kill herself. And I thought, I can't believe I said that. And that was the first time that she looked at me. And I thought she was going to say, thank you. Thank you for understanding. I'm long overdue. It's time for me to do it again. So I thought I was in real trouble. And I said, what are you thinking? And then she looked right at me like I'm looking at you. And she said, if you can really understand why I might have to kill myself to get out of the pain, maybe I won't need to.
Wow.
And then she smiled. And then it was my turn to grab onto her eyes. And I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm not going to give you any treatments that you've had that didn't work before unless you ask me. Would that be okay? And she looked at me with a look that said, keep talking, because she'd been tried on everything. And I said, what I'm going to do, and I'm looking into her eyes, like I'm looking into yours. And I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find you wherever you are, and I'm going to keep you company there because I don't want you to be alone there anymore. Would that be okay? And then her eyes got a little watery and she smiled and she said, I think I'd like that. Can you see how that's might get through to someone?
Yeah. That was, I cannot imagine a scenario like that. That must have really helped her because I'm assuming, uh, as a layman, I'm assuming that at times standard procedures may not work, and you went out of your way to be extremely empathetic and look at the world from her lens, and you succeeded at it.
Yes, and I wrote an article after there was a journalist, Anthony Bourdain, who killed himself. And then there was an American businesswoman, Kate Spade, and they both died by suicide in the same week. And several years ago, I wrote an article on Medium called Why People Kill Themselves, It's Not Depression. So it got 400,000 readers in about 10 days because of the title. And I said, depression, losing your job, losing your marriage, all of that can add to suicide. But there's a lot of people who are depressed who don't kill themselves. There's a lot of people who lose their job. They don't kill themselves. So, but one of the things that I discovered that most suicidal people feel at the end is they feel despair. And if you break the word despair into DESPAIR, it means they feel unpaired, hopeless. That means without a future, helpless, unable to help themselves, powerless, useless, worthless, meaningless, purposeless. And if they all happen at the same time, it's pointless to go on. And so they pair with death to take the pain away. But if you can pair with them in their despair, they may let go of death and grab on to your empathy.
Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like it would be better to allow this person to kill themselves?
There have been times. I'll share one anecdote. I wrote a chapter in a book called Living Through Wanting to Die. Living Through Wanting to Die. And one of the things I used to do also is I would do house calls to dying patients. And I was called in to see this former athlete who got Parkinson's disease in his 50s. And he was very dynamic, but he was just reduced to having all the, those movements that people with Parkinson's have. And the quality of his life was gone. And I remember he had 5 children, I think 2 lawyers, 2 doctors. I forget what the 5th one did. This was over 25 years ago. And they reached out to Dr. Schneidman because he wanted to kill himself, but he wasn't able to because of the Parkinson's disease. He couldn't even kill himself. So someone would have to kill him because he couldn't do it. So I was called in and I did a house call. And on my way there, I picked up a couple books. One will probably be known to you. The other one won't be. I picked up The Diary of Anne Frank. And because I wanted to give that to him to say that she lived in this attic and found a way to feel alive. And that there might be a way for him to be living in this attic of Parkinson's disease and feel alive. And then there was another book called Death Be Not Proud by John Gunther. And it talked about his son, who I think had a brain cancer. And the idea, and I gave that to the family, that yes, we don't want him to kill himself, but we don't want him to suffer. And I remember I met with the family, and it was interesting. The children were very strong professionals, doctors and lawyers, and the wife was very quiet, very passive. And I met with the father, and then I met with all the children, and I said, I can see why it makes sense, if he's suffering, to let him die. And he wasn't going to die for a long time. Parkinson's takes a long time to kill you, but his suffering was awful. And his psychological suffering was awful. And I said to them, and he couldn't take antidepressants because of the side effects. They were causing all kinds of urinary infections and things that, so he couldn't do that. And I said to the family, there is a treatment that's been around for 25 years, and it's called shock treatment. And it's gotten a bad reputation because of various movies, but it's quite civilized, and it's very powerful, and it doesn't have the side effects of all the medicines. It was very difficult to get it approved because you had to go through extra psychiatrists. You had to prove that everything else had been tried. And I said, I don't know whether he's depressed. And if we could reverse the depression, maybe he'd feel better. Or maybe he's not depressed. His life is just miserable. I said, I don't know. And I said, but I think it's worth giving him a course of shock treatment, electroconvulsive therapy. And it's very civilized. I mean, it's not like you see in the movies, the way it was done and still is done, although there's been things that have replaced it now. It's done in a way in which you don't have a lot of dramatic physical effects like you see in the movies. And I said, I would like to see if we could try that and see if it lifts his depression. He might not want to kill himself. And it was interesting when I said it so clearly, the mother, who is very quiet, stands up in the room and she stands up to her very powerful lawyer and doctor children. And she said, we're going to do what this doctor just said. I mean, it was fascinating because she was very quiet and she stands up and says, we're going to do what he said. And like a miracle, the shock treatment helped not only lift his spirits, it seemed to make his Parkinson's better. In fact, it made his Parkinson's so much better that that the family did a lot of research on shock treatment as a treatment for Parkinson's. So, so in answer to your question, yes, there are times when I think when life is just so painful, and I think it's more painful to allow them to live if there's no relief. But that's a
Yeah.
philosophical discussion, and I'm not here to say what you should do, but I think each case needs to be seen on its own pros and cons.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think at times suicide or euthanasia might be the compassionate thing to do. This is, of course, in very rare cases. I've spoken to a few depressed people, not as a psychologist. I'm not a professional, but as a friend, as a well-wisher. And some of them say that they wish to kill themselves, but they don't want to because they're afraid of life after death. What do you think of this perspective about life after death?
Again, I think whatever seems to help people survive, and I think if that's what can keep you going. But again, there have been cases in which, for instance, in several states in America, they now have something called euthanasia, where you can help someone die if they have terminal cancer and pain that just doesn't go away, and they're not going to get any better. You know, they're now increasing that because it's humane. You know, they're in pain all day long. They're not going to get better. So I think it really depends on the situation. And it's a complicated question. It raises all kinds of ethical concerns. I think what I discovered, though, is what I'm trying to share with the world is that I'd like to teach the world more about surgical empathy, because it can really bring people from the dead. In fact, I spoke, in addition to speaking in Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. That was some years ago, but a few years ago, I spoke in Moscow because 5 of my 9 books are bestsellers in Russia. And there is a video, which I'm going to send you a link to. It has Russian subtitles, but it's in English. And it's a video in which there is a therapist named Naomi Feil. She must have been in her early 80s then. And she's meeting with a Black woman named Gladys Wilson, who has dementia. And Naomi has developed something called validation therapy. And validation therapy is really very much like empathy, but it actually uses physical touch. But I will send you the video that you can share with your listeners, because it's astonishing. There is a moment towards the end, and I won't tell you. I don't want to ruin the surprise, but there is a moment, and you'll know what it is, where, and I've presented this to hardened Russian businessmen, but there is a moment in which everybody's jaws open and they go, "Oh my God." And it's the power of reaching someone where they're at. So that's part of what I'm trying to, here's something I will share with your listeners. So a couple of years ago, I spoke in Moscow again with a Nobel Prize winner named Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And I was one of the main speakers, and he was one of the main speakers. And my whole focus in my talk was to teach the audience, and I have a video clip of this. I said that whenever you're with another person, whether it's a conversation like you and I are having, whether you're speaking to a team, or whether you're speaking to 1,000 people, whoever you're with, underneath they're listening to you, they're listening for something. And most conversations are conversations where you're listening to me, I'm talking to you, and it's a very nice conversation. But if I can go underneath what you're listening to me about and tune into what you're listening for, it changes it. So I'm going to try that with you right now. Okay. Are you willing to try?
Sure. So instead of listening to me, you're listening for something.
No, I'll share. So here's an example. You're listening to me. You have a bunch of questions that you're asking me. Tell me about surgical empathy. Tell me about get out of your own way. Tell me about, and I'm trying to give you good answers, and I think they're okay. I think it could have been tighter, but it's late here, and I've had a long day. But I don't know if I have to wake Larry King up from the dead to talk me off of doing a terrible job here. But you're listening to me. But underneath, tell me if this is what you're listening for. I think it really matters to you that you give value to your listeners. And the fact that they trust you and they have confidence in you and they believe in you, you want to honor their trust, their confidence, and their belief in you. And what you're listening for are guests who will give your listeners value that helps your listeners' lives. What you're also listening for is a terrible guest who might have a great book, but he or she is just terrible. They make no sense. You know, you're thinking to yourself, I can't post this. My listeners it's gonna drive them crazy. So you're listening for something that will immediately make your listeners' lives better because you want to honor their trust and confidence in you. And you want to protect your listeners from guests who may be famous, but they're terrible guests. Is any of that true?
I agree with the first half. I think it is true that I am looking for value from my guests. I disagree with the second half because you describe yourself as a sloppy guest, which I think you're not. I think you're a wonderful guest and you have provided a lot of insights. And to me, this is not just a mere podcast. To me, this is also a free therapy session because I find this incredibly therapeutic just talking to you. I understand a lot about myself and how my mind works. So if I'm getting a free therapy session from Dr. Mark Goulston himself, this is great. Why not?
Well, I'm happy to do that. Also, I'm partnering with one of the top psychiatrists in all of India. I'm not sure if you've seen him on the news, Dr. Sandeep Vora.
Okay.
He's in Delhi, and he and we are partnering in the next several months to create a tool that it's looking as if they may use it in all of India for mental health screening. And if you look up Dr. Sandeep Vora, Vohra, and he's on the news a lot in Delhi. So I'd be happy to introduce him to you. You'll have him on your show. But no, I know, look, I know even if I'm sloppy, I know that when we can have a rapport like we're having, that it makes up for it. But I do think that you're listening for the guest who's sloppy, arrogant, conceited, and you're thinking, geez, this person's a jerk. So I think I'm getting away with this because we have this therapy session going on. But what I'm saying is there may be guests that you've had that really they just don't make any sense. They can be a little arrogant. They talk down to people. And so, but what I was getting at is that, can you feel that you're listening for something underneath what you're listening to?
Definitely, I am listening for something. I'm not just listening to you. I'm listening. I'm. This conversation is like a. It's like a journey. I am searching for something. I am looking for something.
So
Definitely.
something so something I will suggest to you and your listeners, because this is also part of my, and I'll send you a link to this video clip from Moscow. If you're listening in, if you can realize that whoever you're with in a conversation is listening for something. And if you're in a conversation and it doesn't seem to be going well, one of the tactics and techniques you can use is when it's not going well, instead of each of you raising your voices or arguing, what you can say to the other person is you can say, can we stop for a moment? And that takes a lot of self restraint, because you're getting angry, but you stop, you say, can we stop for a moment? And they're going to say, what? Because you're in the middle of an argument. And you can say, when we started speaking, you were listening for something and you didn't hear it. What were you listening for? That if you heard it, instead of arguing, we'd be having a conversation. What were you listening for that you didn't hear? And they may share what that is.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. One of my mentors who died, he, in one of my books, it might be in Just Listen, but there's a chapter that I think the title is Take a Conversation All the Way to No. And this is more for business people. And he shared this story where he was meeting with the head of a theater chain. And this mentor of mine worked for Coca-Cola. And he was one of the top people at Coca-Cola. And he was meeting with the head of this movie theater chain. And this mentor of mine, his name was Walter Dunn. He was so likable. You just love the guy. And he's talking to the head of the theater chain. And he keeps talking. And then the head of the theater chain says, we've decided to go with Pepsi. And Walter said, and so this is a technique also, he said, what didn't we speak about in the conversation? What didn't we bring up that if we brought up into the conversation, you might give me a different answer? And so the head of the theater chain said, well, what you didn't bring up and you didn't know is that we're redesigning all of our theater lobbies, and Pepsi has agreed to pay for that. And Walter said, well, Coca-Cola can do that. And the person said, fine, we'll go with you. But can you see that? It's a funny story, but you can use this. But what you have to do is realize, not get so nervous when it seems like a conversation is going in a direction you didn't want it to go. If you can just pause and realize that it didn't start out that way, and then ask someone, you were listening for something and we didn't cover it. What were you listening for?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try to use that and implement that in my future conversations. Another problem that a lot of young people face today is this evil of procrastination. We keep pushing things and pushing things and pushing things until it's too late, and then we are left with regret. The result of procrastination is usually regret. How can we overcome procrastination?
Well, if you read Get Out of Your Own Way, you'll remember that what I wrote about procrastination is, and I said, we procrastinate not because we're lazy or disorganized, it's because we're lonely. And what I wrote about in the chapter, if you'll remember, is that a lot of the things that we procrastinate on are things we don't want to do. And a lot of times what happened is when we were young, we did things that we didn't want to do and it was painful. And when we're young, we say to ourselves in our unconscious, when I grow up, I'm not going to do things that I don't want to do. But then what happens is we grow up and we end up not doing things we don't want to do and we procrastinate. So what I pointed out in that chapter is that sometimes when you have, this goes back to the beginning of our interview, sometimes when you have someone that you're doing something with, it will stop you from procrastinating. So for instance, let's say you're going to a university and you live in a dormitory and it's a mess. Well, if the dormitory says this Saturday, we're all going to work to clean up the dormitory, and we're going to do it for 4 hours, and then we're going to celebrate and we're going to have some food afterwards. Well, there's a good chance you could all clean up the dormitory because you're doing it with other people. And a lot of times, for instance, what I said at the beginning, I need to learn how to eat better and exercise. But if in my mind, I'm doing it with someone, instead of procrastinating, I'm motivated because I'm knowing that the people I care about are doing something that's good for them.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't solve all procrastination, but I'm giving you and your listeners some ideas that maybe they hadn't thought of.
That's a very practical idea. I want to talk about another issue that has exploded in the past 2 years. And this has exploded not just here in India or in the United States, but all around the world. COVID-19. The Indian government released crime statistics that said that in the year 2020, more Indians died from suicide than from COVID-19. Which was very alarming because during 2020 and even last year, all we saw in the news was people dying from COVID-19. But in reality, mental health issue turned out to be a bigger issue and a lot more people were dying from that. Should mental health illness also be considered as a pandemic?
Well, mental health is a pandemic. And you're going to catch me. I'm going to talk about something that I'm fairly passionate and a little bit upset about, and that is technology and social media. What's happened is I believe that the world has become addicted to excitement, and it's been at the expense of people being close to each other. See, I think when people feel close to each other, when you feel a sense of community, there's less suicide. But what's happened with technology and social media is, at least in America, younger people, they're addicted to excitement. And you have to keep feeding excitement because it's an addiction. So you need more video games, you need more social media, you need more friends who like you on Facebook who don't even know you. And I think what's happened is, and I fault some of the tech giants, such as Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, because one of the things they all have in common is, in fact, Elon Musk's brother said this about Elon Musk a couple of weeks ago. They said, he is empathic to mankind in the future, but he's not empathic to people. Mm. And so some of these tech giants, many of them don't have much emotional intelligence, and some of them will admit they have something called Asperger's, but it allows them to be incredibly focused and they can accomplish amazing things. And what happens is they're not good role models for how to emotionally connect to other people because none of them are good at that. But what's happened is they have addicted to the world, to excitement. But the problem with excitement is when you get stressed out, you don't know how to get close to people. And I think feeling close to people. I'll share something that I did that I would love to do in India. About 3 years ago, I was part of a panel at Hollywood High School, Hollywood, California. And again, it's not the glamorous Hollywood. I mean, these are all third world Blacks, African Americans, Hispanic students. And we did a program after school on stress. And we had a panel of 2 life coaches, a therapist, and me. And whenever I'm on a panel, I always go last because I'm never scripted. I always try to connect with the audience. So we were in the cafeteria. There's about 40 students. It's after school. And I think the main reason they came there is because about a half an hour after the panel, everybody was going to get pizza. I don't think they came there for the panel. And so the panelists all talk and they did a great job. And I could see that the students were getting a little restless. And I was the last panelist. And I can send you a link to this article too. And I said, I want to try something different. So picture this. I'm in the cafeteria with this panel. There's about 40 students with chairs facing us. And I said, I would like each of you to think of the worst moment in the last week that you had. Think of the worst moment and raise your hand when you're thinking of it. And they looked at me like I was crazy, but one by one, they raised their hand. And then I said, good. Now I'm going to give you a bunch of words and we're going to go one by one and you're going to say the word that fits how badly you were feeling. And here are the words: anxious, frustrated, angry, depressed, overwhelmed, alone, lonely, ashamed, angry. I may have already said that. And so one by one, each of the students said the word. And when we finished, I said, what did that feel like? They said, that felt terrific. I said, why? Those are all negative words. And they said, I didn't feel so alone. I felt like I really felt like I connected with these other students. I said, didn't you look down on them for saying the words? They said, no, I felt closer to them. And I said, here's your challenge as a high school student. You know 4 emotions: excitement, boredom, fear, and anger. Excitement, boredom, fear, and anger. And you just felt something else that was different than any of those, and it felt better. And I said, here's your homework assignment. I want you to write down all those words. And when you're worried about a friend, go up to them and say, there was a crazy psychiatrist who came to the high school and he did this exercise, and ask your friends, to talk to you about a bad time they had in the last week and give them one of the words, but then keep them talking. When they say, I was anxious, angry, say, what was that about? What were you anxious about? What were you angry about? And keep them talking. And they're going to feel better and they're going to thank you. And it was interesting because after it was over, there were some teachers behind them. So there I am in the cafeteria, they're in front of me, and behind the 3 rows are some teachers. And a teacher came up to me and said, when you did the exercise, each person, when it was their turn, they got nervous. And then when they said the word, they relaxed. Like this, anxious, frustrated. And the teacher said, it was like watching dominoes fall towards the panel. But do you see what happened is we created a shared emotion, but that's not what happens in their lives. What happens in their lives is, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all this stuff. And it's making things worse for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to link, I'm going to put all the links in the description, all of the links and all of the videos that you shared. And I want to talk a little bit about our current society, especially with youngsters. A lot of young people, especially millennials and Gen Z kids, they get offended very quickly. We have become very uh, thin-skinned, especially I believe in the US, where there is this woke culture. People say that they're very woke, and they get offended at a comedian, they get offended at the joke. Is this unhealthy for society?
Oh, I think it's tremendously unhealthy because what happens is, let's go back to the definition at the beginning. Remember, mental health is having something happen and you modify your internal reaction so that when you respond, it's positive instead of negative. Well, when you get offended easily or you yell at people, it's not a good thing. And so, yeah, no, I think it is. I think it's a bad thing. And
Yeah.
I think I'll share something because I've been giving talks with a friend of mine whose 14-year-old son died by suicide 3 years ago. And we've been doing talks to an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And we did 2 global live streams about 3 months ago to the whole world. 400 people showed up, but it was global YPO from everywhere. And one of the tips that I give in the presentation is it's called Fido parenting. And Fido, at least in America, is the same. Fido means dog. That's a nickname for a dog, and at least in English, Fido. But what Fido stands for is we're encouraging families, if they have dinner together, that the mother and father go through this exercise where they say, what is something that each of us felt upset about? That's the F. What is something, and the I is impulse. What is it that it made us want to do? And what you want parents to do is model not giving into impulses. But a lot of times children don't see this in their parents, but a lot of parents aren't as impulsive as teenagers are, but they don't talk about it. And then, so at first, the mother or father will say, this is what I felt upset about. My impulse was to get angry or to scream at someone. D is what did you do about it? Well, what I did do is I didn't scream at anyone. I just walked around the building 3 times. And O, the final O, is the outcome. How did that work out? Well, it worked out much better than if I'd screamed. If I'd screamed, I would have made a big mess. And so what it is, it's a way of parents modeling for their children a way to walk and talk and feel their way through upset. And one thing it's already doing is it's helping marriages, because sometimes husbands and wives, moms and dads, afterwards will go upstairs and one will say to the other, what I was feeling upset about was you. And my usual impulse is to yell at you, but I didn't want to yell at you again in front of the children. And what I'm doing instead is I'm telling you, this thing that you do, please stop it. It's very upsetting. And the outcome is that's a much better outcome than yelling at your spouse in front of the children.
Yeah. I'm going to end this podcast with one final question. This is a very vague question, but nonetheless, it's a very important question. What is the purpose of life?
What is what?
What is the purpose of life?
Well, I'll share an anecdote with you. There's a fellow on CNN named Sanjay Gupta. He's a famous medical person from, I think, his family's from Pakistan, I think. And he has a brother named Sunil Gupta. And Sunil has a wonderful book out called Backable. It's about, and it tells the stories about how did some tech giants get people to believe in them? How did Jeff Bezos create a bookstore online called Amazon? And so I'll end with this because it was just one of those wonderful moments. And I was asking him about his heroes. And one of them was a grandparent, but he said one of his other heroes was his 9-year-old daughter. And sometimes they have breakfasts and he asked them questions, to keep their thinking. And he said, recently he asked his 9-year-old daughter, what is the meaning of life? And she said, to discover your gift. She's 9 years old. And then he said, what is the purpose of life? And she said, to give it away.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm not going to be around when she grows up, but I would vote for her for be president of the world.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And she's only 9. Thank you so much, Dr. Goulston, for being on my podcast. This was very insightful. I especially enjoyed listening to your anecdotes.
I think I got away with being sloppy, don't you think, Pratham?
No, I don't think you were sloppy at all. I think you're being too humble.
Well, no, you've just been a good host, and so I hope we will stay in touch, and so that because you're a good person, and what keeps me relevant as I get older is to help people like you land in the future, your future, and make the world better.
Thank you so much.